Right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third in our series on animation. My name is Mandy. I'm part of the Designlab team. With me today is Kieran Black. Kieran is our mentor advocate and has been running the series of webinars for us over the last few weeks. We started a series on animation a little while ago, and I've been slowly building up to today, where we actually get to have a look at how animations work in Figma in particular. And we're delighted that you have been able to join us. A couple of things before Kieran gets started. You'll notice on the top right of your screen, if you have not attended a webinar before, that there are a bunch of tabs that you're able to use. The two most important ones are the chat tab. In that one, please do introduce yourself, say hi, let us know where you're from, and any questions that you would like to ask one another, you can ask there. The other important tab is the one next to it. It's called Questions. If you do have any questions on today's webinar topic that you would like Kieran to answer, please pop them into there. And once Kieran has finished going through the content that he's sharing today, we will get around to answering those questions for you. And then, as always, if there are topics that you would like to hear us cover off in these webinars, please do put them into chat. We will go through everything that you've said afterwards and make sure all the topics that you most want to hear about make it into future webinars. And then the last thing from me before I hand over to Kieran is in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have the final in our series on animation. It's going to be looking at animation specifically in Webflow. So watch out for the invitation for that, and we hope that you can join us. So with that, I'll hand over to Kieran.
Awesome. Hey everybody, I'm just getting all the comments about the about sharing it on Google Drive properly. So just hang in there. I'm going to be changing that so that anybody can access that. So bear with me for 2 seconds while I get that. Anyone with the link can view, and let's go copy link, and just maybe let's see if that should work now. But let me just paste it in the chat again, and maybe just one of you see if that works, like the new link that I just posted in the chat. And tell me how that goes. So yeah, still doesn't work. All right. Sorry about that. What I might do is I might sort of do that after here. You don't need to be following along in the actual app. I'll be sharing screen the whole way through, so don't worry about that. Okay, so yeah, I'll do that after the chat, guys. So keep asking for access, and I'll just individually grant access to everybody that's asking for it. So yeah. All right, well, let's jump in. Let me share my screen, because I think that is step number 1. So enable screen share, and I'm just going to do my entire screen. Great. And we've got like an inception going on there. And yeah, so I'm going to go more, and I'll just say anyone with the link should be able to get and view it. Right, there we go. Hopefully that works for everybody. Again, just I'll check the comments like afterwards, and sort of like see if everybody is able to get access afterwards. So if you're still not able to get it after the webinar is finished, then I'll have another look at it and go from there. All right. So yeah, as Mandy said, we're going to be looking into how to create animations in Figma. And as always, the talk's going to be around 30 minutes. The Q&A is going to be around 30 minutes. And yeah, don't forget to ask questions in the question tab, as Mandy suggested. All right. So this whole talk I'm going to be doing inside of Figma, just to sort of show you like how easy it is to actually animate, like throughout the use of Figma. So the very first thing is like what can we animate. So what are the actual properties that we can actually animate? And to do that, to demonstrate that, I'm actually just going to go through into prototype mode. So if you're not familiar with Figma, the way that Figma animations work is that it bases it off of a transition from one frame to another frame. So in this case, it's going from frame 1 to frame 2. And what can happen is you can do it based off of a whole bunch of different things. When you go into the prototype section over on the right-hand side, by default, it's set to design, but you can change it to prototype. What that means is that we now have a whole bunch of different interactions that then cause some sort of animation. So very similar to the chat that I was talking to you about last time, where there's an interaction and like there's a trigger and then there's an animation. In this case, I'm setting it up so that there's after a 1 millisecond delay, so just essentially straight away, I want to navigate to frame 2. So it's going to navigate to frame 2, and then it goes back again. So what this creates when we press play is it creates an animation that just infinitely loops between two things. So in this case, we're animating the size. So there's a few other things that we can animate going forward. So I'm just going to zoom in on this just a little bit more. There we go, nice and big. All right. So the next thing that we can animate is position, right? Pretty straightforward. We can translate one thing to another. And we can make it really like nice to sort of like show, oh, this thing it wants to move to there. We can also animate rotation. So this is really great for things that we want to sort of like give a little bit of life to. We can also animate layer attributes. But not all layer attributes are the same. So as you can sort of see here, we can animate between fills. We can animate between a color and another color. So in this case, yellow to purple. We can animate between opacities. So it can go from orange to orange at 100% opacity to orange at 0% opacity. But what you'll notice here is that we're not able to animate stroke. So this is like going from like a stroke of like 40 to 80 or something like that. And we're not able to actually like edit that, animate that, unfortunately. So when we can also animate drop shadow. So as you can sort of see, the drop shadow settings are changing there. So if you wanted to show a little bit of like an animation of something popping off the page, like that can happen. We can do border radii. So we can animate those. So we can go from like a circle to a square and back again. We can do inner shadow. It's a little bit harder to see this one, but it's you can animate the inner shadow of something if you so wish. There's also layer blur. So we can sort of like go from like really blurry or not blurry at all to just insanely blurry. And then we've also got background blur. So that's when we sort of like have an image or something behind it that we just want to like blur what's inside of that thing as well. So yeah, so those are all the things that we can like animate in terms of layer attributes. Then we've also got like little bits and pieces like ellipse arcs and going from one vector to another. So unfortunately, like some of these things are not yet available in Figma, but it's something to be aware of. Like what are the limitations? So you're not just banging your head against the wall, going, why can't I animate this? I should be able to animate this. There are some things you just can't animate, and hopefully Figma will make those available eventually, because it's one of those things where, like in a lot of cases, like both of these like animations would be really great. Like if you're making a Pac-Man game, or if you're wanting to like create some sort of animation from one vector to another, like that would be amazing to have that sort of like morphing ability. All right. So yeah, so that's the first part. It's like, what can we actually animate? Like that's the hardest thing to sort of like remember and to keep playing around with. And just keep in mind, this is like right now. Always like updates, like either weekly or every 2 weeks, on like really big updates and sometimes really small updates. So you never know when they might sneak one of these things in. So always test them out. Don't take my word for it. Like test out the different animations and see what's going on. All right. Then we've got easing curves. So you may have seen this in other platforms, in other like programs, and even in my previous talks. But look, what is an easing curve? So this is essentially at the rate at which an animation occurs. So if we then go into prototype again, we can then see. So you'll notice that, by the way, I'm closing the prototype each time, because if you just simply press play here, and then I then try to switch tabs and go to easing curves, and I try to press play again, it just keeps the previous prototype open. So that's why I close down that and then go to the next one there. So if you're trying to figure out like why I'm closing the tab every single time, that's why. So let's dive into easing curves. So the first one is an ease out, like easing curve, right? So all of the animations that I'm about to show you all occur over 3 seconds, and they all have different easing curves. The only difference between them is that. So in this case, we have an ease out thing. So you can imagine if an ease out is decelerating. So imagine that you're in a car and you're simply coming to a stop. Like that's what's happening. So you're going as fast as you can, and then you come to a stop. So this is really great for things that are coming into frame that weren't previously in frame, and then they're coming to a stop. So think of like a menu flying in, or some sort of like content flying in from the side, and so on and so forth. So ease out is a really great thing. All right, and then the next one is ease in. So it's kind of the opposite. So it accelerates, right? So it accelerates into that. So imagine a car from a full stop, like, and there's a green light, and then you move forward. Like that's essentially what's happening here. And this is really great for, again, the opposite of what I was just saying, when something is going out of the screen and flying away, right? So that's something that makes sense for it to happen. All right. And then we have the combination of the two, which is ease in and ease out, which is both accelerating and then decelerating as you sort of like going through that. This is really great for, this is a lot more natural of an animation, that you see the whole animation take place on the actual canvas. So if you're like, let's say that you're throwing a ball up in the air, right? If you throw a ball up in the air, it leaves your hand like slow, but it then releases its energy and goes up fast. And then it reaches a point where it starts to decelerate, and then it comes down again, and then accelerates, and then like hits your hand again. So it speeds up and then slows down, and then we eventually come to a complete stop when you catch it in your hand again. But that doesn't slow down at that point. That just stays where it is. Okay. And then lucky last is linear. So this is, as you may imagine, just there's no acceleration, there's no deceleration. It's just doing the animation, right? And this is really robotic, and it's not the greatest for any kind of like animation for UI, unfortunately. So for me, like I barely use linear, and I would probably advise to do the same. There are some times when you would use it. So let's say that you're creating a music player, like a Spotify clone or something like that, and you simply want to like animate like a track going from 0 minutes to 3 minutes and 20 seconds, right? Like that slow sort of like time tracking going across, like is linear. Like you don't sort of like speed up half of the music and then slow down half of the music. That'd be a bit weird. So this linear like allows for that. So yeah, so that's sort of like easing curves. Of course, there's a lot more than just those 4 easing curves, but those are the ones that we have access to in Figma. And for more about easing curves, like I would look into like things like After Effects and Principle and other like animation tools like that that allow you to do even more more types of animation and easing curves. All right. So the next thing now is like, let's actually get into some of this prototyping stuff, right? So as I mentioned, what we're doing is we're creating 2 frames and we're trying to animate between the 2. So let's get stuck into what can we actually animate in terms of more of a structural animation. So this is sort of like going between tabs. So I'm just going to play like what I did and how I did it through. So let's press play on that one. So what I've got here is I've actually just got like a scrollable list. So this is like really like nice to sort of like have if you're creating an app that has a lot of content and then you're wanting to put this in, you're able to do that. But what's really cool here is that I have a tab that can actually animate between the 2, right? And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. But I then have this set of content like that I can also scroll through, and then I can tap on here and then it'll go to this content and I can scroll through that content, so on and so forth. Another thing that I did as well is I actually made the section actually draggable between. And as you'll notice, this little underline and this little opacity thing actually happens as well. So if I do that slowly, you can see that it animates between the 2 like that. And these are actually really simple to do. It's not hard at all. So let's go back and let's actually talk about like what is actually happening in here. So what I've got is a frame that is just, if I go to my design tab, you can see that the frame is an iPhone 11 Pro or an iPhone 10. And I've just got 2 of those, right? And then what I have inside of there is I have my content, which is inside of a frame. So if I expand that out, I've got all of my rectangles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way through. And then I then have on the overall frame, I actually have a thing that allows me to like do vertical scrolling. So to get to that, all you have to do is go to the prototype section, and you can see that vertical scrolling is enabled. If I change that to no scrolling, you can imagine what that does. So if I click over here, like I simply cannot scroll, right? If I change it to like horizontal scrolling, it won't really work because there's nothing to scroll horizontally. But if I was to like maybe put something over here or something like that, and then do it, you can then sort of like see that I have some like horizontal scrolling as well, which is not really working right now because it's going outside of the frame. It's because I'm clipping the content. So let me just hit unclip content. There we go. And then I can then sort of see how there's like a little bit of content that's flipping over that side as well. So I think it might be messing up because of the drag interaction that I've got on top of that. But I can quickly just show you what that might be by clicking. Let's say that we have, and this is like how cool it is. It's super fast to create these animations. So let's say that I had some content here and some content over here, and I wanted to put that inside of there. So let's paste that in. There we go. And I wanted to scroll that content. So I want to do horizontal and maybe even horizontal and vertical scrolling. Because you can imagine there might be a time when you might need like a map or something like that, and you need to scroll both horizontally and vertically. So let me just like put some content way up there so we can sort of see how that looks. I'm going to close off that there, and then I'm going to hit prototype on this page here. And what we can sort of start to see is I can actually move this around and scroll all of that. I think what was happening was my drag interaction was conflicting with my horizontal scrolling. So that's always something to be careful of, is like your animations aren't crashing into each other like that. So yeah, so that's scrolling. So that's what allows us to do what we need to do with scrolling. I can delete that page. I don't need that anymore. And the way that this happens between each of these, as you can sort of see, and in the file, you can inspect this, you can play around with this. That's why I made it available. So you can play around with all the different types of animations that you can do. I've got push here. So push is a type of animation that switches between two frames like this. And as you can sort of see over on the right-hand side, there's a bit of an animation to show like what actually happens when you click on the push interaction. And you can also change the direction of the push and so on. So that's how the animation going from left to right is happening. How is the animation happening between this guy and this guy? Because when we sort of look at it, it doesn't actually look like I've done anything to like animate anything. And that's actually correct. Like I actually haven't. It's using a thing called smart animate. So what happens when you've got smart animate matching layers ticked on? What that does is that looks for layers that are in this frame that match the name overlays of this frame, right? So if we look on the left-hand side here, let me just make my layers panel a little bit longer. We can see that this one here is called rectangle 17, as well as this one here is called rectangle 17. And they're both in the same hierarchy order. So we can see that's inside of group 1 and group 1. And we can also see that this one is 19 and this one is 19. We can also see that this one is 16 and this one is 16. So the naming convention of these, so long as they're the same name between two frames, what Smart Animate does is it tries to animate between the two, which is really cool. So that's what all of those other examples were earlier on. So yeah, so that's what's happening here, is that this one here, I've just set to a lower opacity. I've just set it to 40% opacity, and then this is 100% opacity. So like I mentioned, it's just changing opacity, and it's doing that. Whereas this one is just moving, like it's actually moving position, right? So both of those at the same time makes it look like a really nice dynamic like animation. So we can again see what that looks like. So you can again picture what's going on. All right, so we've got that scroll animation happening. Oh, actually I need to set that scroll animation because right now it's not set. So let's go to prototype, let's go to vertical scrolling, and let's do that. And that's what I really love about Figma as well, is that how fast it is to jump in from like testing the thing to actually editing the animation. It's a really nice workflow, really quick. It's just switching tabs like that, just going, oh, yep, cool. I made an adjustment. All right, I need to test it out. Bang, and it's done. So yeah, so here we go. When I click on it, it animates there as well, which is really nice. All right, let's move on to the next one. So like I said, feel free to play around with that, like using the Figma file. I think I sorted out the Figma file now because I'm not getting any more notifications, which is great. No news is good news. So we've got navigation hamburger. So this is something that a lot of people use. A lot of people like create. A whole lot is a hamburger menu with like a bit of a slide over, right? And so I wanted to sort of show you how to create one of those really quickly. And again, files there for you to play around with after the fact and play around with whatever you would like. So to create this, we're actually going to use, instead of like going from one frame to another, we're actually going to use a thing called overlay. So what we want to happen is when we click on this little button here, I want the frame to come in from the left-hand side, but over the top of my content. So to do that, like I mentioned, we just need, so I'll delete this interaction so we can go through the steps. So all I have to do is click on this this guy here. So as you can sort of see, I've only got the menu clicked. I could also like click on any like item, doesn't necessarily have to be that. But I then, when I'm inside of the prototype thing, I do have access to this little node here that I can click and drag over to my frame 2, right? So what it'll do by default for your interactions is that it'll use the last used interaction, like most of the time. I'm not quite sure what the exact rules are, but most of the time it does that. But otherwise, it defaults to on click and just navigate to. So what we want to do is we want to say on click, which is correct. So we could do on drag while hovering, mouse enter, mouse leave, so on and so forth. But I want to say on click, navigate to. Well, I don't really want to navigate to it because that's what we were doing previously. We were navigating between 2 frames. What I actually want to do is create an overlay. So as you can sort of see here, we've got an overlay. So I want to do that. I want to open the overlay and of frame 2. I then want to change it to top left because it might be centered, it might be top right, and so on and so forth. So you can see how this could be used for maybe like a modal pop-up to then sort of like say, like, do you want to give this iOS device access to your location, something like that, like deny, allow, like whatever the case may be. Then we also can have close when clicking on the outside. So because this modal is not going to be covering the entire frame, what we can actually say is when I click outside of the thing, we can actually dismiss the overlay, which is kind of nice. And then we've also got add a background behind the overlay. So we've got a little bit of like a transparent background to show that the content behind it is not interactable anymore. And then we've also got this move in. So let's actually see how this works so far. So let's click play and go through that. All right. So as I mentioned, there's a bit of a scroll there, but then I've also got this menu icon here, right? So as you can sort of see, I've got a frame that is going over the top of it. As you can sort of see here, if I go back to my design, it's 375 wide, which is the size of the iPhone 10 and the 11 Pro. And then this one here is 300. So what we have here is like a 75 pixel gap. So this isn't any particular like size or anything like that. I just arbitrarily chose 300. Like you can choose whatever you want to do and go from there. But what we've got here now is we actually have like an overlay that if I click on it, like nothing happens. But if I click on the actual like outside here, it'll actually dismiss, right? So that's a really great like way. You could also build in a button to close the overlay, which is also an if we click on this guy here and go to prototype, you can actually say close overlay rather than open overlay. So you can like close it like by having an X. So you don't have to rely on just people knowing to click on the outside of it. You can put a more instructional close button there as well. All right, but then so that's using overlay. But then there might be a time when you need to transition between like a screen within an overlay, right? And you might be like going, what does that even mean? So let me show you what that means. So let's say that I have, I've clicked on this. Oh, something is going wrong there. Let me just click out of that and let me press play there. Something was not having fun. It's taking its sweet time. There you go. Okay, that took a while. All right, so let's maybe Figma's having a few issues. All right, so let's open that back up, and let's say that I wanted to create this again, and I wanted to have something happen inside of this overlay without interrupting like what I currently have, right? So in this case, I actually want to make the sum category fold down, right? And to do that, like we just actually have like this nice little animation that is pushing everything out, right? Like to do that, like actually isn't that hard. So again, we've got this frame 2 here and frame 3. So we have our 2 states that we want to animate between. And what I created over here is I simply just rotated the little chevron, and I have my spacing for all of my like my subcategories, and I've like put that inside of that. And then I've actually then like got here my Subway and my Eat Fresh. That's actually here, but it's actually set to a 0 opacity. So what happens is when I click on this, it goes from 0 opacity and slightly higher up to 100% opacity and slightly lower down. So that's why we get that really nice like little animation of it sort of like sliding down and then sliding back up. It's because I've made the opacity 0 and the position up a little bit higher than what it's usually used to. So yeah, so that's what's animating between those two. So if what I've done here is over on the right-hand side, if we have a look at what the actual interaction and animation is. So what happens is on click, I want to swap frame 2 with frame 3, right? And then I've got a smart animate here that's going on. So this smart animate makes it so that, like I said, anything that is using the same name and like allows us to animate seamlessly between those 2 positions and opacities. All right. And then, so yeah, so that's how I would go about doing a hamburger menu. And then we've also got a micro animation. So this is like going a little bit deeper. So when you're wanting to try and do some like micro animations, these are like perfectly fine to do inside of here. But let's actually quit out of that prototype and press play on this prototype to see what I did, and then I'll break down like how I did that. All right, so let's zoom in so you can actually see what's going on. All right, so I've got it so that when I click, it will transition between the 2 things. So it's not automatically doing it right now. So if I tap anywhere on the purple, it will like animate between the 2 states that I have here. So what I'm doing here is I'm animating between a hamburger menu and like a close menu. So you can imagine using this on a website, on an app that has a hamburger menu coming over. And then we might have something with a plus and a tick. So maybe you're adding something to a list, and then a tick just denotes that, hey, like you have added this thing to the list. So it just replaces that plus as you're going along. All right, so let's see how I did those. So what you'll notice is that between the 2 here, I've actually created like 2 sets. So I've got frame 1 here. Frame 1 has menu close, and then MC1. So MC just stands for menu close. So MC1, 2, 3. So those are my 3 shapes that I'm using, and then I've just got a background shape just to sort of like make it the 24 by 24 icon. And then same sort of thing that goes here. So for this menu close, I've got MC1, 2, and 3. So what you'll notice is that all I'm doing is I'm actually just rotating MC1. I'm rotating it this way. So it's on a 45-degree angle. And then I'm rotating MC3 this way. And what I'm actually doing with MC2, which is this middle stroke here, what I'm doing is I'm actually just contracting that. So instead of it being a long line, it's now then transforming into a little circle down here. So so that's what's sort of happening. So if you pay attention closely, you can sort of see that happening. So you can see this top one is going to rotate down, this bottom one is going to rotate up, and then this middle one is just going to collapse in on itself. So if you slowly sort of see that, you can see like what's actually happening. But if you do it fast enough, it makes it look like it's all just disappearing in on itself, which is really cool. It gives you a nice little cool effect. All right, and then let's have a look at the little plus here. And this is a little bit easier. This is simply just doing it 45 degrees one way, 45 degrees the other way, and then just positioning it over the top. So as you can sort of see, this top one here is just folding 45 degrees and moving down, and it's also shrinking down as well, contracting on itself. And then this one here is doing the same thing, but it's elongating itself and doing it 45 degrees the other way. And yeah, going from there. All right, so again, these are all available. You can go and play with these, create your own. I'd love to see how you go with those. And then the last one is button interactions. So this is one that I often get when I'm teaching UX Academy, is what is the difference between default, hover, and active? What is disabled, so on and so forth. So this allows us to like fake a hover interaction and a click interaction when we are sort of like doing all that kind of stuff. So what we're doing here is we're actually saying, while I hover over it, I want you to navigate to frame 2. And then when I click on it, so when I do mouse down, I want you to go to frame 3. And then when I, then as soon as that is done, so when the mouse up is done, I want you to navigate back to frame 1. So let's actually show how that looks in real life. So this is, let's go back to the default. There we go. So I've got this interaction. Again, let me just zoom in so you can see what's going on. So scale up. There we go. So I'm not quite sure why there's a line in there. I think there's like some sort of bug in Figma right now, but yeah, that line isn't supposed to be there. You're not going crazy. There is a line there. So we've got a default button here. So we've got a little bit of a drop shadow happening here. We've got like a dark purple going on. So when I hover over it, what happens is it moves up 1 pixel, the drop shadow changes, and then the color also goes a little bit lighter, right? So it's heading towards the light almost. So when we go and do that, we've got that sort of like hover interaction. So that's what that hover interaction is doing, is it's animating between those 2 states. And then when I hit mouse down, so when I click it, it's then saying this is active. So it's going from default to hover to active, and then I let go, and it goes back to default. But because my mouse is over it, it thinks it's hovering again. So that's what happens, right? So it's nice and easy to sort of see like what actually happens when these kinds of things go on, right? And again, you can play around with this, like create your own animations and go from there. All right, and then lucky last, what I have here is, this is for you guys to take away, like, and create your own. I'd really love to see like how you guys can put together like your own animations. I've created like a sort of like dribble clone almost with like Designlab. Also check out these amazing artists on Dribble. I've been following them for years, and they're just really great people, and they're really awesome designers as well as illustrators. So have a look at some of their work. You can also click into each one of these and click on the little open URL. You can see that they're like what their profile is like, and so on. Also, if there is like links and references to Inter. Inter is a font that I use a whole lot from Google Fonts, and that is available for you to download for free if you need it. So yeah, if you keep getting that error of like, I can't edit the text, go to Inter and download that. All right, so yeah, I'd love to see maybe you do something where you actually animate this circle into like a bigger like overlay. So let's quickly create something like that. Like I'd love to see, again, like your own take on this, but yeah, I'd love to see like what you come up with. So maybe you just simply like make this bigger and move this up, and then change the corner radius to be not so hectic, maybe like 16, and then and then make this 375 and go from there, right? And then you might make this then like 0 opacity as we do that. So then when maybe when I click on this, I go to prototype, I then make that go back to here. When I go from here to here, I want to then smart animate it and maybe do an ease out transition. That makes sense. And then 200 milliseconds. So on tap, navigate to 34 with a smart animation, easing out 200 milliseconds. Same sort of thing. If I hit the status bar, I might want to smart animate back with an ease out animation, maybe 200 milliseconds, the same sort of like speed as what I did before. The reason why I'm doing 200 rather than 300 is because there's a lot going on. So I don't really want it to take forever and make the user wait for the animation. So that might be something that you go in and do, right? So let's click out of this one here, and I'm just going to put the first frame on here and then hit play there. So let's see how that works. And we can sort of see that that like animates nicely between the two sides. So yeah, so I'd love to see like people animating the nav bar, people animating this, like play around with it, like see what you can come up with. And yeah, like maybe post it in the Slack like afterwards, either in the Foundations one or in the UX Academy, maybe in the general chat, so people aren't confused what you're doing and why. But yeah, and then tag me in them, like say @Kieran, and then show me what you've done. Because I'd love to see what you do and how you did it. And if you've got any more questions on those, I'll be happy to help as much as I possibly can. All right, that's it from me, I'm pretty sure. And it's time for Q&A. So let's dive in.
Great, Kieran, thank you so much. At the moment, we've got 4 questions, so we'll probably have time for all 4 of them. But if other questions do come to mind for anybody as we go through these, please do add them to the questions tab. That way we'll make sure not to miss out on them. So Kieran, the first question is from Robin, and it reads, what is the difference between motion design and animation design?
Say that again, sorry.
No problem. The question.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I just saw the question. Yeah. So there really isn't much difference between those. So like motion and animation are essentially synonymous. So what we're really sort of like looking at there is with motion, you're just like talking about the way something moves, right? And versus animation, what we're trying to do is we're trying to really sort of like animate something between two things. So it's not like it's splitting hairs, and I probably wouldn't worry about that. But yeah, there are things that are called motion design school and other kinds of places like that. But yeah, motion design, animation design, they're pretty much synonymous, and people get them confused all the time. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Great. Our next question is, in the navigation scrolling section, how were you able to drag between frames if the interaction was set to untap?
Okay, so I actually set up 2 interactions for that. So the bottom nav was set to untap, but the actual content was set to drag, right? So I can quickly screen share again and show you what I mean. So let's go back to Figma, and there's the inception thing again. All right, so let's go back to the animation scrolling. So what I had here is I had the on tap, right? But then on the actual frame here, the actual scrolling thing, I said on drag, right? So it's 2 interactions doing the same thing, so that when you go to create it, so whether I tap on the bottom nav, or whether I drag the item, so if I drag the item, it'll switch over, or whether I tap on it, it will do the same sort of thing, right? So that's how I was able to do that.
The next question is, where do you find inspiration for your micro animations?
Mainly Dribble. As I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of really talented people, like the ones that are in that course content there, that are really, really great animators that have been doing it for way longer than I have been doing it a lot more intensely than I have, and can give you some really good tips on that kind of stuff. But yeah, micro interactions and animations, all of those kinds of things are really good to look at. Maybe Dribble, and just like keep an eye out for some of your favorite apps. Like sometimes you won't even notice that they actually have some animations in there. So yeah, just I'd always like just keep an eye out for them when you're going through them, through any kind of apps that you're daily or like using on the daily. So yeah, there's nothing specific really, but yeah, just Dribble and keeping an eye out for cool apps that I sort of see other people interacting with. And yeah.
How do you determine the smart animate time period? For example, 200 seconds.
Yeah, so for that, the default really is around 300 milliseconds. And the reason why 300 milliseconds is a good default is because it's fast enough that the user doesn't feel like they're waiting for everything. But it's also slow enough for the human eye to register, like something happened. So if you're doing 30 frames per second, like, so that's like, yeah, I can't do the math right now, but we're able to see like multiple frames of the animation happening, like throughout a 300 millisecond animation. 200 milliseconds is, like I sort of said, because it's going from a really small thing to a really large thing, because that has to translate over that large amount of time, I wanted that to be a little bit faster because I didn't want the user to have to wait for that animation to do the thing that they wanted to do there, right? So for me, like, it is sort of like trial and error, but a good default is around 300 milliseconds, and then you might speed up or slow down based on like what feels right. It's like animation is a very qualitative thing. Although we're using like quantitative tools where it's using 200 milliseconds and ease in, ease out, so on and so forth, it's very like numbers based, but it's very much a feeling based. Like play around with these prototypes in your hand and you'll know what feels fast or what is like blocking you from doing like the next like thing, right? A lot of people don't like animations because of that, because it gets in the way of a user's interaction. But if you do it correctly, it shouldn't, right? It shouldn't be like you have to wait for the animation to load to then do the thing. An animation should help you, not hinder you. So if you're getting that feeling, maybe the animation isn't fast enough, or maybe you're animating too much, or maybe you're animating the wrong thing. So yeah, I would sort of like use 300 milliseconds as a sensible default, and then speed up or slow down based on that.
Awesome. Thanks, Kieran. We've got 3 more questions, and I think we'll have time for all of them. So the first is, can you animate within a frame? Let's say we have a long list of articles, and at the bottom, we have a go to top button. Can you use anchors within the frame to navigate to the top or any other position with one single frame?
Yeah, so that's not at the moment. But as I sort of said, Figma is constantly updating. Like you never know when they might do that. You could fake it as well by creating multiple versions of the same frame and sort of like animate like between all the different frames and sort of say like, okay, this is this section, this is that section, and so on. But yeah, unfortunately, no, not right now. You can hack it, but it's not really a built-in feature. I try not to use any sort of like hacky methods for anything these days because I try to share my designs with other people as much as I possibly can. So doing hacky things means that you have to also teach the person who you're working with that hacky thing. And make sure that they know the all the pitfalls of using that hacky way of doing things. So I try to stick with what does Figma have built in, and unfortunately right now it doesn't have that built in. So yeah, there's no scroll to top, or let's say that you were doing your portfolio and you wanted to have a one-page design and you had like your work, about, and then contact us, and then you wanted to like click to about, and that goes halfway down the page. Yeah, unfortunately, that doesn't really exist. But like I said, you could hack it in a weird way by like creating multiple versions of the same frame to make it feel like it's that, but it's not exactly what you're after, unfortunately.
So 2 questions left. Second to last is, how many companies are using Figma right now? If I already know AE, do I still need to learn Figma? Can you compare a little bit between these 2 tools if possible?
Yeah, sure. In terms of how many companies are using Figma, it's really hard to tell. There is an increase in use of Figma because of little tools like this, like inside of Figma, because it's really easy to prototype these days. But yeah, there's no exact number because like a lot of companies probably don't want to disclose that. But there is like if you go to UX design tools survey, like UX design tools survey 2019 versus the 2018. So I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but like I'll just paste that in and go to 2018, and you can look at the Figma use versus the rest of the tools between 2018 and 2019, and you can then see like you can see the difference between the two there, and see that Sketch is plodding along nicely, always like getting bigger and better, but then Figma is like on a steep incline as well. So yeah, you can sort of see that Figma is getting more and more used, but yeah, it's still like Sketch has been around longer, so it has a lot more market share. In terms of learning AE, yeah, if you already know AE, this should be like easy to you, right? The reason why this is like a good tool to have, as you may have noticed in AE is essentially just a movie, right? Yes, the animations are really, really nice, and you're able to do a lot. But I would sort of say that you're not getting the interaction out of it. You're not getting the when I click this, something happens. When I drag this, something happens. Right? You're not getting that trigger action response. So that's like the main difference. So I would sort of say, look, if you're already like good at using After Effects, like this will take you probably about like a weekend to master. Like it's nothing in comparison to After Effects. After Effects is like this on steroids, but minus the interaction side of things. It's just purely animation.
So we have had another question pop in, so we now have got 2 more left. I'm hoping we can get to both. The first,
sure.
What is the animation to development handoff process like?
It really depends on the company that you're working with. I know that people don't like to hear it depends, but that's the truth of it. Some companies will bend over backwards for animation because they understand how crucial it is, and some companies will just want to use whatever comes out of the box. So there are things like if you're using React, for example, so that's a JavaScript framework that to build websites and apps and that kind of thing. If you're using something like that, there might be a React package that already does a whole bunch of animations. Like I sort of mentioned, I think it was like Pose. I'll link to that below. Pose, yeah, by pop motion. And you can use this in any kind of thing, in any kind of website, and like that, so long as they're using React or Vue or React Native. So you can sort of like set up these animations. But this is using code. So the hard thing about Figma is that what you've got in Figma can't exactly be like just right click, export, save, right? Like that's not something that we can do right now. And to be honest, like there aren't many animation tools that can do that. The closest one that we have is After Effects using the Lottie plugin, Lottie. So if you go from After Effects, you can export an animation using that, but you can't export like the interaction method and stuff like that. You still have to hook up all of that kind of stuff in code. So yeah, there isn't one way to just go Figma development done, right? Like that isn't a thing, unfortunately. There is still a manual handover process, very similar to the way it used to be about 10, like not even 10 years ago, about 5 years ago, when it came from Photoshop to doing like any kind of design. There was a very manual process of like, oh, this should be 10 pixels and redlining it and so on. So yeah, unfortunately right now, there isn't anything. You have to work with your developer and hopefully they can work with you back to do that. And like I said, it depends on the company. Some people will really want to include animations. Some people won't care, unfortunately.
Great. Then our last question for today, and if you do have questions that we haven't been able to answer or something pops into your head after this webinar is finished, please do reach out to us on Slack, or if you're not on Slack, write into hello@tryanddesignlab.com. So Kieran, last question is, how would you create a horizontal carousel with vertical scroll?
I'm not sure if you could. I mean, you would have to just make sure that they weren't conflicting, because I think that's what I ran into before. Like I would just play around with it. So I would first create, let's say that you're sort of like doing like almost like an Instagram sort of like feed, how like you've just got like a vertical list, and then some of them have more than one image, so it's sort of like a mini gallery, and you want to sort of swipe between those. To do that, I would sort of say first create the overall feed, and then inside, so like have an item, like just do rectangles for now. And then inside of one of those items, then create like an animation between those. So it's probably not possible, like now that I'm saying it out loud, because you're sort of having to put an animation inside of an animation, and that's a limitation on Figma. That's not that should be a thing that exists, but it doesn't. Like I'm just like playing it out in my head right now, and yeah, I don't think you could. But again, like prove me wrong. I'd love to see like your attempts at it, and yeah, let me know if you do solve it, because yeah, that is something that a lot of people like want, is an animation within an animation, or what you essentially call drivers. So a driver is essentially you do one interaction over here, and as you're doing that one interaction, it's actually moving or animating something completely separate to it. So you can imagine maybe like you have like a slider. Think of like maybe like a dial or something like that for your lights, to make them like brighter or more dim. Going from those like to sort of like drive the other interaction of what's happening. That's what a driver does, and I'd love to see Figma implement both the animation within an animation and a driver and drivers, because drivers like exist in After Effects, they exist in Principle. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different things that would be amazing, but they currently don't exist. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't think it's possible. But like I said, let me know if you figure it out. I'd love to see how it goes.
Kieran, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you all for joining us. It's been great. Before you log off, just pop into the chat, let us know what you'd like to hear about, and we hope to see you in 2 weeks' time as we explore animation within Webflow. Stay safe, everybody, and stay healthy, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
See you later.